In a quiet village, hidden deep within a thick forest, life moved slowly, shaped by the rhythm of the sun and the seasons. The village was small, with round mud houses that had thatched roofs and narrow paths that twisted between them. Children ran barefoot over the soft earth, laughing as they chased each other. Chickens clucked in the yards and smoke curled up from cooking fires. The people in the village lived close to the land, planting crops, tending animals, and helping one another. Life seemed simple, but it was not without its troubles. Sometimes the rains would come too little or too late, or sickness would quietly creep into the village. In times like that, fear and suspicion could grow faster than any crop. Among the villagers lived a young woman named Zola. She was not like the others. She had a calm way about her, and her eyes seemed to notice things that others missed. She often walked alone in the forest, gathering herbs or watching the sky. Sometimes, when a villager was sick or troubled, Zola would quietly help them, leaving a healing herb or a kind word where it could be found. People often wondered about her. Some whispered that she had a gift, a power to sense things others could not. They said she could see danger before it came or know the truth behind a lie. But most people in the village simply ignored her, calling her strange and keeping their distance. Zola did not mind the whispers. She never asked for recognition or reward. Her joy came from helping others even if they never thanked her. She loved the forest and the animals and the small river that ran past the village, singing as it tumbled over stones. She felt connected to the world in a way that others did not understand, and that was enough for her. Life in the village was mostly peaceful. Each morning, the sun would rise behind the mountains and the villagers would begin their work. Men would take their hoes to the fields, women would carry water from the river, and children would run errands for their families. The smell of fresh earth and cooking fires filled the air. Everyone knew their place and everyone followed the old rules and traditions. Then one evening, something strange began to happen. The sun dipped below the trees, painting the sky with deep orange and purple, and the air became unusually still. The village animals, which usually wandered freely, began to behave oddly. Chickens clucked nervously, cows refused to leave their pens, and the dogs growled at empty spaces. At first, the villagers thought it was just an ordinary night, perhaps the wind or a storm approaching. But the next morning the signs became clearer. The crops, which had been healthy and green just days before, were beginning to wither. Leaves curled and yellowed under the sun, and small holes appeared in the maize and yams. The villagers were alarmed. They had worked hard all season, tending the fields from dawn until dusk, and now their food was in danger. Mothers worried about feeding their children, and fathers feared the approaching months would bring hunger. Animals too began to fall ill. Chickens refused to eat, cows grew weak, and goats had fevers. The village healer tried to understand what was happening but could not find a cause. The sickness spread quietly at first and then faster, leaving the villagers helpless. Every day brought new signs of trouble, and every day fear grew a little more in their hearts. People began to whisper among themselves. They talked about spirits and curses, about old wrongs that might be returning to haunt them. Some said it was the work of strangers who had passed through the village months ago. Others blamed the ancestors, claiming the village had angered them in some way. But slowly more and more people began to look at Zola. She was different, quiet, and solitary. She walked through the fields alone, she collected herbs from the forest, and she often spoke of things that seemed strange to others. Fear made people look for someone to blame, and Zola was an easy target. At first, the villagers only whispered. They spoke in corners and behind closed doors, careful not to let Zola hear. "She has been walking in the forest too much," some said. "Perhaps she is angry at us," others added. A few villagers tried to defend her, saying that Zola had always helped them, but their voices were soft and lost in the growing fear. Zola noticed the change in the villagers. She could feel their glances and hear the tension in their voices. But she remained calm. She knew she had done nothing wrong and she hoped the fear would pass. She continued her work, quietly helping where she could, tending to sick animals in secret, and trying to protect the crops the best she could. She moved through the village as she always had, greeting a child here, leaving some herbs there, and smiling softly when she saw someone in need. Despite her efforts, the fear did not go away. Each day, more villagers seemed worried, more suspicious, more ready to believe the worst. The crops continued to wither, and the animals continued to fall ill. A heavy tension settled over the village, and even simple conversations were filled with unease. People looked over their shoulders, and trust seemed to disappear like mist in the morning sun. One evening, as Zola walked by the river, she saw a small group of children huddled together, whispering. She approached slowly and asked if they were all right. The children looked at her with wide eyes, not with fear exactly but with confusion. "The crops, they will not grow," one said. "And the cows are sick." "It is your fault, Zola," another added quietly. Zola's heart ached. She knelt down beside them and spoke softly. "I am not the cause. I only help. You must not be afraid of me. The world sometimes has problems we cannot see at first. But we can work together to find a solution." The children listened, but even they could not hide the fear that had begun to grow in their hearts. Word of their whispers spread, as children often do, and soon more adults were speaking of Zola with suspicion. The peaceful rhythm of the village had been broken, replaced by a quiet tension that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Zola knew she could not force the villagers to trust her. She could only continue to help quietly, hoping that the truth would be seen before fear led them to do something irreversible. That night, she sat near the river, listening to the water flow and thinking of the forest. She felt the sadness of the villagers, their worry and fear, and she felt the weight of being different in a place that feared what it did not understand. As the moon rose high, casting silver light over the village, Zola made a silent promise to herself. She would protect the village no matter what. She would heal the crops and animals as best she could and continue to help those in need. But deep down she knew that fear was a dangerous thing. When people are afraid, they often do not see the truth. And sometimes, that fear could turn into something far worse than sickness or dying crops. The next morning the villagers woke to a new day, but the air felt heavier than before. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying an almost eerie stillness. The chickens clucked nervously and the cows shivered in the fields. People moved quietly, their faces drawn and worried. The whispers of suspicion were no longer confined to corners, they were spoken openly. "It is her fault," some said. The village was restless. Each morning, people woke with worry in their hearts, looking at the fields that once promised food and life. The maize stalks were shriveled, leaves curled and brown, and small holes were scattered across the yams. The animals too were sick and weak. Chickens could barely peck at the ground, goats limped slowly, and the cows had lost their usual energy. The villagers tried to work in the fields, but fear weighed down their hands and hearts. Every failed attempt made them angrier and more desperate. The whispers about Zola had grown louder over the past days. At first, only a few voices murmured her name, unsure of what to believe. But fear spreads faster than water in a dry riverbed. The children began repeating what they had heard at home, and soon everyone knew the villagers were looking for someone to blame. Some remembered the old stories of magic and curses, tales told by their grandparents. These stories had always been distant like myths, but now they felt real. Something had to be done. Kaya, the village elder, had lived for many years. He was respected for his wisdom and experience, but even he was not immune to fear. Seeing the crops fail and the animals fall sick, his mind sought an explanation, a cause he could point to. When the villagers came to him with questions and accusations, Kaya struggled to think clearly. He knew Zola had always been different. She often walked alone in the forest, gathering herbs, speaking softly to the trees, and helping the sick without expecting thanks. Some villagers had always felt uneasy around her. They did not understand her, and fear had grown faster than reason. One morning, Kaya called the villagers together in the center of the village. The sun was high, beating down on the dusty paths and the thatched roofs. The villagers gathered, murmuring among themselves. Some held small baskets still filled with half-rotted vegetables, while others clutched weak chickens that could no longer produce eggs. Their faces were pale and their eyes darted around looking for answers. Kaya stood on the raised platform near the oldest tree in the village. He had seen many seasons and he had learned that the villagers looked to him for guidance. But today he did not feel certain. Fear made the air heavy and thick. He spoke in a voice meant to sound calm, though there was a tremor in it. "Our village is in danger," he began. "Our crops are failing. Our animals are sick. We do not know why this is happening. We have tried everything, yet the misfortune continues." The villagers nodded and muttered among themselves, their eyes wide with worry. Kaya looked at Zola, who had quietly come forward to listen. Her face was calm, but her heart beat faster. She knew that many villagers already suspected her, and she feared what might come next. Kaya's eyes narrowed slightly as he continued. "Some say this is the work of spirits. Others whisper of curses brought upon us by outsiders. But I have seen enough in my years to know that when misfortune falls so suddenly, it is often the work of someone close. Someone among us." His gaze rested on Zola. "I believe this misfortune has come through Zola." A collective gasp rose from the villagers. Some shook their heads, unable to believe the elder would accuse her. Others nodded quickly as though the word of Kaya had confirmed what they had already feared. Zola stepped forward, her hands raised slightly in a gesture of peace. "No, Kaya, I am not the cause," she said, her voice steady. "I have never brought harm to this village. I only help." But her words fell like drops of water on dry soil. Fear had hardened the villagers' hearts, and they were no longer listening. Whispers turned into louder voices. "It is her fault," one woman shouted, her face pale with worry. "I saw her walking near the fields last night," said a man, trembling with anger. "She spoke to the trees and the crops began to fail after that. It must be her magic." Zola shook her head. "I only walk in the forest to gather herbs. I have done nothing to harm anyone." Her voice was calm, but inside, panic rose. She could feel the villagers' fear growing, and she knew they might act before they even heard the truth. Kaya raised his hands to quiet the crowd. "We cannot ignore the signs," he said. "I have lived long enough to know that misfortune rarely comes without reason. If we do not act now, our village will suffer even more. I do not wish to blame without cause, but I must warn you all. Zola has been near the fields and the animals. She has been different from us and her ways are not known. We cannot risk ignoring the danger." Some villagers began to shout, accusing Zola openly. They spoke of curses, of evil spirits, of past misfortunes they believed she had caused without proof. Fear had blinded them. Even those who had benefited from her quiet help in the past now looked at her with suspicion. Mothers held their children closer, and men shifted uneasily, unsure of what to do but desperate to act. Zola stood silently, her heart aching. She had always known that fear could twist minds, but seeing it in the eyes of those she had helped was painful. She had hoped that reason and truth would prevail, but now she saw that fear had grown too strong. The villagers no longer saw her as a person, they saw her as the cause of their suffering. Days passed and the accusations did not fade. The villagers began to avoid her entirely, crossing the paths to prevent meeting her eyes. Even the children who once ran to her for guidance now hid behind their parents. Zola continued her quiet work, tending sick animals in secret and trying to help the crops where she could, but the village had changed. The air was tense, thick with fear and suspicion. Even simple greetings were met with wary glances. One night, a group of villagers gathered near the edge of the forest. They spoke in hushed voices, worried but angry. "We cannot wait any longer," said one of the men, his hands trembling. "The village is dying and the crops continue to fail. Kaya says it is Zola. Perhaps he is right." Others nodded, fear and desperation mixing with anger. They spoke of confronting her, of making her leave the village or face consequences. Zola did not know this was happening, but she could feel the tension in the air. She walked through the fields as usual, her eyes on the withered crops, wondering how to help. The animals were weak, their moos and bleats low and sad. She felt a wave of sorrow for the village. She had always wished to protect it, but now she realized that fear could destroy more than disease or bad weather ever could. The next morning, Kaya called another meeting. His face was serious and the villagers waited, some with hope, others with anger. "I have seen the fear in your eyes," he said. "I have heard the whispers. This is not simple misfortune. There is power here we do not understand. We must act before it is too late." He paused, letting the words sink in. Then, pointing toward Zola, he said, "It is her. Zola has brought this upon us, whether she knows it or not. We must decide what to do." The villagers erupted in shouts. Some cried for punishment, others for exile, and some just muttered their fear. Zola stood silently, feeling the weight of every stare, every whispered accusation, every look of distrust. She knew that nothing she said would stop the fear. Logic, reason, or truth did not matter. Fear had taken over, and it demanded action. The morning was heavy with tension. The sun rose pale behind the trees, casting long shadows over the village paths and the withered fields. Zola knew something was coming, though she did not know exactly what. The villagers had been watching her closely, their faces filled with fear and suspicion. She had tried to speak to them to explain the truth, but her words had fallen on deaf ears. Fear had grown too strong, stronger than reason, stronger than truth. By mid-morning, a crowd had gathered near the center of the village. Men, women, and children stood in anxious silence, whispering among themselves. Even those who had once been kind to Zola now avoided looking her in the eye. They did not trust her, and they were no longer willing to listen. Their faces were tight with fear, and their hands trembled with uncertainty. The tension was like a thick fog wrapping around every person, making the air feel heavy and cold. Kaya, the village elder, stepped forward. His face was set, his eyes hard, though deep down he felt a small flicker of doubt. He had seen much in his life and he had never wanted to cause harm. But fear had clouded his judgment. "We cannot wait any longer," he said. His voice was firm but not loud. "The crops are dying. The animals are sick. We must act before it is too late. Zola has been near the fields and the animals. She has been different from us and we cannot ignore the danger she may bring." Zola stepped forward, her hands open in a gesture of peace. "Kaya, please," she said softly. "I have done nothing wrong. I have only tried to help. The misfortune is not because of me. Please listen to me." But the villagers were no longer listening. Their minds were filled with fear, and fear does not welcome reason. "It is her fault," a woman shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Zola. "I saw her by the fields at night. She spoke to the trees and the crops began to wither. It is her magic." Others began to shout in agreement, and the murmurs turned into a chorus of accusation. Zola's heart sank. She had hoped that truth and calm words would reach them, but now she saw that fear had blinded their minds. Their eyes no longer saw her as the young woman who had helped them in secret. They saw only a cause of misfortune, a threat that needed to be removed. She could feel the weight of their anger and fear pressing down on her, heavy and suffocating. The villagers, led by Kaya, began moving toward the edge of the village, where the old, abandoned well had stood for many years. It was deep and dark, overgrown with vines and moss, and few villagers approached it anymore. They called it a dangerous place, but now it had become a symbol of punishment and fear. Zola followed slowly, her hands raised, her voice quiet but pleading. "Please don't do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I am not the cause. There is a pest in the fields and the sickness is from the water, not me. Please let me help. Don't let fear decide your actions." But the villagers did not hear her. Their minds were filled with panic and dread. Each step toward the well was a step away from reason. Some of the younger villagers muttered their doubts, but the crowd pressed forward, and fear was stronger than any question of truth. When they reached the well, the crowd circled around it, their eyes wide, their breaths fast. Zola looked down at the dark opening, feeling a chill run up her spine. She had always known the well was deep, but now it seemed like a mouth ready to swallow her whole. She tried to step back, but hands grabbed her arms, pulling her forward. "No. Please," she cried. Her voice was loud, but it was drowned out by the villagers shouting. "I have done nothing. You are making a mistake. Please listen to me." Some villagers hesitated, unsure if what they were doing was right. They glanced at each other, hoping someone would speak up, hoping that reason would return. But fear is contagious. One by one, their doubts disappeared under the weight of the crowd's panic. The villagers had chosen a target, and Zola had become that target. Kaya stepped closer, his face heavy with sorrow. Deep down he knew there was another way, but fear had overtaken his judgment. "This is for the village," he said softly, though his voice carried to everyone. "We must act now. If we do not, more misfortune will come. I do not wish to harm you, Zola, but this is the only way to protect the village." Zola shook her head, tears running down her cheeks. "There is no curse. I only help." Her words were full of desperation, but they fell on ears that refused to hear. The villagers, gripped by fear, could no longer see her as a person. She had become a symbol of the danger they imagined. Hands pulled her forward, closer to the edge of the well. The earth beneath her feet felt soft and uneven, and the opening of the well loomed like darkness itself. She tried to resist, but the villagers were too strong. Her cries grew louder, echoing off the trees and into the quiet morning. "Please, don't throw me," she begged, reaching out to anyone who might listen. Some villagers glanced at her, their faces tight with doubt and fear, but no one intervened. Fear had become a shield, blocking every thought of reason or compassion. With a heavy heart and tears flowing freely, Zola was forced toward the edge. The ground gave way slightly beneath her feet and she stumbled. She looked into the well, and the darkness seemed to stretch endlessly, swallowing the light. Panic rose in her chest, but she did not scream this time. Her voice was already spent. Instead, she whispered a prayer to the sky, hoping that anyone would see the truth. And then the villagers pushed her forward. For a moment the world seemed to stop. The wind held its breath. The chickens stopped clucking. The leaves on the trees shivered in silence. Zola's eyes widened as she fell into the darkness. Her body plunged downward, the walls of the well close and cold, the air filled with a damp, musty smell. Her hands reached out, grasping at the sides, but gravity pulled her toward the bottom. She cried out, but there was no one to hear her. The voices of the villagers above became distant, muted by the walls of the well. Her heart pounded, and for a moment she feared she would never see the light again. The world she had known, the village she had tried to protect, was now above her, and she was alone in the dark. The villagers, standing at the edge, looked down into the well. Some turned away, unable to face what they had done. Others watched silently, their faces pale and drawn. Kaya's eyes were full of sorrow, but he did not speak. He had believed he was protecting the village, and he had convinced others to act. In that moment he realized the weight of fear, and how it could lead even the wisest to make choices they might regret. Slowly the villagers began to leave the well, walking back toward the village paths. Their steps were uneven and their faces showed unease, but in their minds they told themselves they had done the right thing. Fear had convinced them that Zola was dangerous. They believed that by throwing her into the well, they had protected themselves, their crops, and their animals. Below, Zola landed with a splash in the cold, dark water. The shock of the fall took her breath away and she gasped, shivering in the darkness. The walls of the well rose high above her, enclosing her in shadow. She could hear the faint echoes of the villagers' footsteps fading and then silence. The darkness of the well pressed in on Zola from all sides. Cold water lapped at her skin, and her clothes were heavy with dampness. Her hands and arms ached from gripping the mossy walls during her fall, but her mind was alive, racing to find a way out. She knew she could not give up. She had survived because she had hope, and hope was stronger than fear. She floated for a moment, listening to the faint dripping of water from the stones above, and then she began to explore the small space she had landed in. Her fingers brushed against the walls, feeling for any irregularities, any signs of a passage or an opening. The water was not very deep and she could stand on the muddy bottom, though the cold made her shiver. Her heart beat fast, not just from the fall, but from the knowledge that her life depended on finding a way out. After a careful search, she noticed something unusual near one side of the well. The stones looked different there, slightly shifted, with a narrow gap hidden behind roots and moss. It was almost invisible, but Zola's sharp eyes saw it. She knelt down and ran her fingers over the gap, pushing aside dirt and vines. To her relief, the stones moved slightly under her touch, revealing a small tunnel that led into the earth. Her heart leapt with a mixture of hope and fear. The tunnel was narrow and dark. Zola hesitated for a moment, listening to the faint echoes of water from the well behind her. She knew it was risky to go inside, but staying in the well was more dangerous. She took a deep breath, steadied herself, and began to crawl into the tunnel. The walls were rough and damp, and the air smelled earthy and musty. Her clothes scraped against the stones and her hands and knees were scratched, but she pressed forward, determined to discover what lay ahead. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading her deeper into the ground. As she moved, she noticed small piles of debris, leaves, broken branches, and strange markings on the walls. It looked like the tunnel had not been used for many years, but it was clearly a path that led somewhere. Zola's curiosity grew. She wondered who could have made this tunnel and why it had been hidden beneath the well. She also wondered if it could help her understand the misfortune that had struck the village. After crawling for what felt like hours, though it may have been only minutes, the tunnel opened into a wider space. Here the air was slightly warmer and drier. The walls were lined with old stones and the floor was uneven but manageable. In the dim light that filtered from a small opening above, Zola began to see signs of life. Small insects scurried along the walls, and tiny holes in the soil suggested that larger pests had been moving through the area. Her mind raced. Could this hidden space be the source of the village's problems? She explored further, moving carefully so as not to disturb the fragile ground. Her eyes fell on a patch of plants growing in the shadows. At first they seemed harmless, but then she noticed small worms and larvae feeding on the leaves. Nearby she saw gnawed roots and chewed stems, clear signs that something was attacking the crops from beneath the soil. Her heart sank and lifted at the same time. She now understood what had caused the crop failure. It was not magic. It was not a curse. It was a hidden pest, a small but powerful threat that had been slowly destroying the village's food supply. Zola's mind began to connect the pieces. The wilting crops, the sick animals, the strange behavior of the chickens and goats, it all made sense. The plants had been weakened by the pests, the animals had eaten the affected crops, and the water in some areas had become contaminated by insects and small creatures that carried disease. The villagers' fears had been misplaced, directed at her because she was different, because she could see and understand things they could not. Tears filled her eyes, but not for herself. She felt sorrow for the villagers, for their fear, and for the harm they had caused without knowing the truth. She understood that they had acted out of fear, not malice. They had wanted to protect their families and their homes, and their hearts had led them to make a terrible mistake. Zola knew she could not hold anger for long. Instead, she had to find a way to help them, to save the village from the real danger before it was too late. She began to gather evidence. She carefully collected small samples of the insects and the damaged plant roots. She examined the water in a small pool inside the tunnel, noticing tiny larvae swimming. She made notes in her mind, remembering every detail. When she eventually climbed out of the tunnel in her imagination, she would need to explain clearly to the villagers what had caused the misfortune. She would show them that there was no magic, no curse, only a natural problem that could be fixed with care and knowledge. As Zola explored further, she found another chamber in the tunnel, larger and filled with soil and stones. Here the evidence of pests was even more obvious. Holes chewed into the walls of the soil, larvae moving under rocks, and tiny traces of disease among the roots. It was a small ecosystem of destruction, hidden beneath the village for years. She realized that this was why the crops and animals had been affected at the same time. The problem had been underground all along, invisible to the villagers who only saw the damage on the surface. Zola sat for a moment, reflecting on what she had found. She felt a mix of sadness, relief, and determination. Sadness because the villagers had punished her unfairly. Relief because she had discovered the truth. Determination because she knew she could fix this if she returned to the village and acted quickly. She understood that she had to find a way to climb out of the well, guide the villagers, and save the crops and animals before the problem got worse. The darkness of the tunnel had not defeated her. Her fear had been replaced by focus, and her sadness by purpose. She realized that the villagers were not evil, they had simply acted out of fear, misunderstanding, and desperation. Now it was her turn to act. She could not let fear continue to guide them. She would show them the truth and she would help them heal the village. Zola began to plan her exit. She remembered the narrow passage near the well and calculated the safest way to climb back up. The water was cold, but it would not stop her. The walls were slippery, but she could grip the moss and stones carefully. She took a deep breath and steeled herself for the climb. Every movement had to be careful, every decision precise. Failure was not an option. Before she started, she took one last look around the hidden tunnel. She memorized the location of the pests, the patterns of the soil, and the evidence that would prove the truth. She imagined explaining to Kaya and the villagers how natural causes, not curses or magic, had brought misfortune to their homes. She imagined their faces when they realized the error of their fear and their mistake. This thought gave her courage and strength. With careful movements, Zola began her climb back to the well. She pulled herself up through the narrow tunnel, her muscles straining, her fingers gripping tightly. The cold water clung to her, the darkness pressed in, but she did not give up. Inch by inch, she rose until finally she emerged back into the open space of the well. The sunlight was a small ribbon above her, promising freedom and a chance to save the village. The morning sun shone over the village, casting long, warm rays across the fields. Zola stood at the edge of the path, looking at the home she had grown up with and the people she had once loved. Her body ached from the fall, the climb, and the cold water of the well, but her spirit was strong. She had discovered the truth hidden beneath the village and now carried the knowledge that could save them all. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Fear had driven the villagers to harm her, but she would not respond with anger. She would act with calm and wisdom. Slowly she walked into the village. The fields were still wilted, the animals weak, and the air heavy with the lingering tension of fear. People noticed her first, stopping in their tracks. Whispers spread quickly. She is back, someone said. Zola, another whispered, voice trembling. Faces turned pale as the villagers looked at her, some with guilt, some with fear, and others with curiosity. They remembered the well, the fear, and the accusations, and many of them realized the weight of what they had done. Zola's eyes swept over the crowd. She saw Kaya, the village elder, standing stiffly near the largest tree, his hands folded, his face a mixture of sorrow and worry. She saw Jael and Sephu, two young villagers who had doubted the elder's wisdom but had been too afraid to speak openly. And she saw the others, men and women who had accused her, mothers holding children, fathers gripping tools nervously, all waiting to see what she would do. She stepped forward calmly. Her voice was steady, carrying across the square, though it was soft and gentle. "Villagers," she began, "I know you feared for your lives, for your families, and for your crops. I know you thought I had brought misfortune. But the truth is different. The crops are failing and the animals are sick, not because of me or magic or curses, but because of a hidden pest that has been attacking the roots in the water. It is natural, not evil. I have seen it with my own eyes. I have proof and I can help you fix it. The villagers were silent at first. Some shook their heads, unable to believe her, while others squinted, trying to see if her words were true. Their fear had made them blind for many days, but now her calm voice carried authority. Even Kaya, who had led the accusations, felt a shiver of doubt run through him. Perhaps he had been too quick to judge, perhaps fear had clouded his judgment. Jael stepped forward. "Zola, you were right," he said quietly. His voice trembled with shame. "We did not understand. We doubted what you were trying to do. We were afraid." Sephu nodded beside him. "We should have listened," he said. "We should have spoken up instead of letting fear guide us." The villagers looked at each other, realizing that even their respect for Kaya had been twisted by panic. Zola nodded slowly, acknowledging their words. "Fear can make us act in ways we never imagined," she said softly. "But it does not have to control us. I am not here to punish anyone. I am here to help. If we work together, we can heal the fields, care for the animals, and restore our village. We can fix this, but we must act wisely and calmly, not out of fear." With that, she began to walk toward the fields. The villagers followed cautiously, unsure but curious. Zola knelt down beside the maize plants, pointing out the gnawed roots, the tiny insects, and the damage caused by the hidden pests. She explained carefully how the pests had attacked the crops underground, how the water had carried sickness to the animals, and how the misfortune was entirely natural. She showed them small piles of larvae and evidence of the pest problem, making it clear that no magic or curses were involved. The villagers listened intently, their fear gradually replaced by understanding. They began to see the truth in Zola's words. Mothers whispered to their children, showing them the tiny insects she had found. Farmers knelt beside the damaged crops, examining the roots and the soil. Kaya, the elder, moved slowly, touching the soil and nodding with a heavy heart. He understood now that his fear had clouded his judgment and almost led the village to a tragedy far worse than natural misfortune. Zola demonstrated how to care for the crops, remove the pests, and improve the soil. She showed the villagers how to treat the sick animals and clean the water sources. Slowly, the villagers began to act, following her instructions. They dug around the roots, cleared away infected leaves, and worked together in a way they had not done since the misfortune began. For the first time in many days, hope returned to the village. Jael and Sephu helped others understand, explaining what Zola had discovered and guiding them in caring for the crops and animals. They admitted their doubts and their fear, encouraging others to follow the truth rather than panic. Even the youngest villagers began to work, learning from Zola's calm and patient teaching. The air, which had been thick with fear, began to feel lighter. Laughter returned slowly as children played among the fields and the sound of hammers and hoes rang out as the villagers repaired damage. Kaya approached Zola, his head bowed slightly. "I was wrong," he said quietly, his voice full of regret. "I let fear guide me instead of reason. I am ashamed of what I did." Zola placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It is not too late to make things right," she said softly. "Now we know the truth, we can work together to save the village. That is what matters." Over the next days, Zola worked alongside the villagers. Slowly, the crops began to recover as they treated the soil and removed the pests. The animals regained strength as the water was cleaned and treated. The villagers began to trust her wisdom, following her advice and learning from her knowledge. They saw that her calmness, her patience, and her understanding were stronger than fear, stronger than panic. The village began to heal not just physically but also in spirit. The fear that had driven them to act against Zola was replaced by respect and gratitude. People who had once doubted her now spoke of her with admiration. Mothers brought their children to her, asking her to teach them about the herbs and the forest. Farmers asked her advice for the next planting season. Even Kaya, the elder, sought her counsel, acknowledging that her wisdom had saved them all. Zola felt a quiet joy in her heart. She had been cast into the well, accused unfairly and feared by those she had helped, yet she had not lost hope. She had discovered the truth, acted with patience, and guided the villagers back to reason. Her calmness and courage had restored not only the fields and the animals but also the trust and harmony in the village. One evening, as the sun set over the fields, painting the sky with soft orange and pink, Zola stood with Jael and Sephu, watching the villagers work together. "Thank you for helping," she said softly. "You could have stayed silent, but you chose to stand for the truth. That is how fear is defeated." Jael smiled a little shyly. "We learned that being brave does not mean fighting," he said. It means knowing the truth and standing with it even when others are afraid. Sephu nodded. And we will never let fear guide us like before, he added. The villagers too began to see the lesson in what had happened. They understood that acting in panic and fear could bring harm even to those they loved. They remembered how quickly they had judged Zola and how nearly they had destroyed someone who only wished to help. Shame mixed with relief as they realized the strength of understanding over fear. From that day forward, the village changed. People listened more carefully, observed more wisely, and spoke with reason before acting. They learned to respect the knowledge and courage of others, even if those people were different or quiet. Zola's patience and wisdom became a guiding light, a reminder that fear should never rule decisions. Zola too felt a sense of peace. The villagers had learned, the crops were healing and the animals were safe. She had turned darkness into discovery, fear into knowledge, and mistrust into respect. Her heart, once heavy with sorrow and worry, now carried hope and quiet joy. She knew that the village would face challenges again as life always brings, but now it had a new strength, the courage to see truth clearly and act wisely. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the villagers gathered near the central tree, offering thanks and recognition to Zola. Even Kaya the elder spoke of the lesson learned. We acted out of fear and we were wrong, he said. But we have learned. We will never allow fear to control us like that again. We respect your wisdom, Zola, and we are grateful for your guidance. Zola smiled, her eyes calm and warm. We all have the power to make mistakes, she said gently. But we also have the power to correct them. Today we choose understanding over fear and together we will protect this village. The villagers nodded, their hearts lighter than they had been for many days. They had been humbled, taught, and healed. That night, as the stars appeared above the village, Zola walked quietly through the fields. She looked at the recovering crops, the resting animals, and the people she had once feared would turn against her forever. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Fear had almost destroyed her, but wisdom and courage had won in the end. And she knew that the village, though small and surrounded by forest, had grown stronger in spirit, ready to face the challenges of tomorrow with reason, patience, and hope.